Erev Tov, good evening. So we're on to the third book of the Torah, Sefer VaYikra, the book of Leviticus. And the first parsha is also called VaYikra, and it deals by and large with korbanot, with the sacrifices. Here's the thing to remember. Originally, Judaism was based about one temple in Jerusalem, and the way to approach God and communicate with God and express yourself to God was through korbanot, bringing offerings, sacrificial animals. It was only after the temple is destroyed, first in 586, then it's rebuilt around the year 500, and then it's destroyed for a second time by the Romans in the year 70. And it's only then that we really move to a synagogue-based form of worship, and it's all about tefillah, no longer korbanot, offering animals. It's now about the words that we recite, that we say. So here's the thing that struck me. Among the first sacrifices that we read about is the olah. The word olah comes from the idea of al, up, going up, and it was called an olah. In English, we sometimes refer to it as a burnt offering. The animal was brought, the animal was slaughtered, the animal was put onto the altar and was burned, and people were able to see the smoke rising up towards the heavens. And in a sense, you were transferring that animal down here from earth in a different form of matter up to the heavens. So that was the first sacrifice we read about, the burnt offering, the olah. And I couldn't help but think the same root word with different vowels, we get the word aliyah. Aliyah means to go up. And originally the idea was you were going up on the bima before the Torah and you would recite the blessings. Hopefully you were not only going up physically, but you were going up spiritually, that your connection with the actual Torah scroll, seeing the words written there right before you, would give you a kind of a spiritual high, lift you up. So here's what I imagined. Two different time periods, when we had the temple in Jerusalem, later when we had synagogues in every Jewish community, and how an Israelite back then coming to the temple, what he felt, what he had to do in order to present and perform the olah, the burnt offering. And in our own day, what happens when a Jew comes to the synagogue and takes an aliyah and says the blessings before God. So here's a kind of creative understanding of those two different experiences and the people involved in those different experiences. First, I imagine the Israelite coming to the temple, and he says, I want to bring an olah, but I don't know what to do. The Kohen, the priest in the temple, says, come to the Mishkan. Before there was a temple, there was the portable temple, the tabernacle, the sanctuary in the desert. Come to the Mishkan with a bull or a sheep or a pigeon. The Kohen would say, when it's your turn, go to the front of the tent of meeting. The Kohen would then continue, place your hand on the head of the animal. Then he would say, slaughter the animal, the Kohen will guide you. And then the Kohen would say, the Kohen then takes from the blood and he sprinkles the blood. He cuts up the animal. He burns it on the altar. The Kohen then says, focus on the smoke. As it rises to God, so will your prayers and your soul. So now let's take that very same experience, coming to this place, this building, but we're no longer in the temple in Jerusalem. It's no longer a Kohen who greets you. Now it's a synagogue, and now it's the rabbi who would be the person giving the instructions. So instead of the Israelite, now it's a Jew. The Jew says, I want to have an aliyah, but I don't know what to do. The rabbi says, come to the synagogue on a day we read Torah. Rabbi says, when they call your name, go up on the bima in front of the Torah. Rabbi continues, place your hand wrapped in the tzitzit on the parchment made from an animal hide. Rabbi says, say the blessing. The Gabbai will guide you. Gabbai over here points to the little plaque, which blessing to say. The rabbi then says, the Baal Koreh, the Torah reader, reads a portion from the Torah. And finally, the rabbi says, focus on the scroll. As the words are sung, they soar upwards. So may your prayers and may your soul. What I wanted to demonstrate by that piece were these two parallel experiences, 1,000, 2,000 years apart, and an Israelite and a Jew, a Kohen and a rabbi. The animal's carcass, an animal hide on which the Torah is written. In both cases, there's a physical connection. Person who brings the offering puts his hands on the head of the animal. Person who comes from the aliyah puts his hand on the rollers, takes his tzitzit, actually touches the animal parchment. So in many ways, we had the loss of the temple and the korbanot, but the synagogue took its place. And in ways that some of us don't even think about anymore, we now have replicated, we've paralleled, we've mirrored all the things that we used to do in the temple, but now we do in the synagogue. So that was the first piece that I wanted to share. Second thing, when we talk about sacrifices, most people assume that all we're really talking about is you bring an animal, a bull, an ox, or a sheep, and you would come and hand it to the Kohen. He would slaughter it, put it on the altar. That was what was involved. But it was much more than that. Originally, sacrifice, probably borrowed from the pagan idea, was a way that people were feeding their gods. You give the gods food, and in return, the gods would do a favor for you. You wanted something from the gods, you had to give them a gift. You had to grease their palm, you had to pay them off. And then they might, in gratitude, give you what you wanted. Well, along come the Israelites they look around and they imitate the sacrificial system. But among Jews, we didn't really believe that we were feeding God the same way that pagans felt that they were. So what do we have? In addition to the meat, the animal that was sacrificed, there were other elements to the sacrificial process. One was what we call in the Chumash a libation, nesech. In other words, people would bring either wine or some kind of an alcoholic fermented beverage. Maybe it was beer, something like that. So you had the meat, you had the drink, And there was one other critical element that you had, and that was some kind of cake or bread. So if you think about it, the three things that people would bring, the meat, the drink, the bread, or the cake, right, represented a basic meal. So the Israelites come with this idea. You go to the temple and you bring the meal. Now, whereas originally people, pagans, thought we're giving the gods food, now I think what Jews felt was we're showing God our willingness to sacrifice something that's dear to us, and we're going to share it not only with God, the part that's burned up goes in smoke to the heavens, but also it was shared with the Kohen. This was his payment. This is what he subsisted on, that you gave him some of the meat and the bread and the wine, and he took that as his pay. And in a sense, he became a partner or a surrogate for God. And then the person who brought the offering, they also ate some of the meat. There was like a barbecue that would be held in the precincts of the city of Jerusalem. The fact that people didn't often eat meat. Eating meat was very expensive. There were no refrigerators. If you're going to slaughter and butcher an animal, you had to get rid of all of it because in a day or two it was spoiled and it was no longer good. So people would come to Jerusalem, often with their family, and they would take the meat and they would go back outside of the temple, and they would sit down and have a kind of sacred meal. And they say, we're eating part, but you know where the other part of this animal? It went to God. God is sharing it. And the holy priest, the Kohen, he also is sharing it. So it was more than just a July 4th barbecue. It was something of real holy significance. Let's talk about the cake or the bread. What did you do? This was called a mincha. Now, today when we use the word mincha, we generally mean the afternoon service. But originally, the word mincha meant something that's presented, something that is laid out. Okay, and it was made up of the choice part of the wheat, the semolina, which was taken from the inner kernels of the stalks of wheat. Then to this, you would mix the ground wheat and make it into flour, mix it with water. You'd have a dough. You would add to it olive oil, and then you would add to it spices, especially frankincense. So you would mix it. And here's the fascinating thing. It could be prepared in one of three ways. It could be either put on the griddle, in which case what you'd end up with was something that was very thin and very crisp, and then could be broken up into little bits. Or it could be deep fried in a pan, in which case what you were left with was something not very crisp, but something rather soft, very much cake-like. Or it could be baked in an oven. Right? So depending on what the reason for the sacrifice, depending on who was preparing it, people might bring this crisp griddle cake or a deep fried bread, or maybe almost like a cake baked in the oven. So I'm imagining that on a particular day, the two priests, Aaron had 4 sons. 2 of them died tragically, but 2 of them, Eleazar and Itamar, were the ones who took over, at first assisted their father, and then took over for him after Aaron dies. So I'm imagining that these 2 men, Eleazar and Itamar, are there in the temple, and as they see people coming in, they realize that there's dinner. Dinner's coming in for us. We get a portion of what they bring. And I'm imagining that they're looking at the people and their offerings. Oh, this one's bringing a pancake. This one's bringing a loaf. This one's bringing something else, right? And almost like their mouth begins to water and they begin to salivate when they think, that looks pretty good. I can't wait until I bring it home and we eat that a little bit later. So here's my imagining Itamar and Eleazar waiting in the temple, watching as people come in and what stands before them. Itamar says, you know what I don't get? Eleazar says, what? Itamar goes, there are 4 different ways to bring a mincha, the offering of grain. Some people just bring the ingredients, flour, oil, spice, and salt. Some cook it into a pancake on a griddle. Some bake it into a loaf in the oven. And some deep fry it in oil. I can't figure out why some people do it one way and why others do it another. What are people thinking when they make their choices? So his brother Eleazar says to him, you know, some people bring what they do best. If you're not a good baker, would you want to offer God a disgusting looking and awful tasting loaf of bread? Then there are others who bring what they themselves like. They probably think, I love pancakes. Everyone else, including God, must love them as well. And then there are those who bring an offering because they know what you or I, or Nadav and Avihu, or Dad would most appreciate. They want us to be happy. Maybe they think we'll then use our influence with God for their benefit. And finally, there are those who don't want to impose their choice on somebody else. These are the same people who don't buy a particular Hanukkah present for somebody. It's liable to just get returned anyway. So they give gift cards and let the recipient buy something he or she really wants. The raw ingredients are the equivalent of the gift card. Obviously, you see the humor there as we're projecting backwards what people do today, what people might have done 3,000 years ago in the temple. So Itamar takes all that in and he says to his brother, so what's your favorite? Eleazar says, plain matzah with cream cheese and jelly. Doesn't get any better than that. Itamar, on the other hand, says, me, it's a hot roll with fresh butter. So we see not only the different options that people brought, but we see the way that the Kohanim were human, just like us, with their foibles, with their tastes, with their own desires. And sometimes you can't help but have the people who are officiating do what they themselves like best, not necessarily what God might like or what the people around them might choose. One more piece from the Torah reading. We talked about the olah, which was the burnt offering. That's when the entire animal was burnt. All the smoke went up. The people who brought it didn't share any of it. The Kohen didn't get any of it. Then we speak about the mincha, the grain offering, the cakes. Now we come to a third category of sacrifice, which was called the zevach shalamim. It's often translated as the peace offering. From shalamim, you hear the word shalom. Okay, so I'm imagining a college professor lecturing in a university somewhere today. And he says the following. Today's class will deal with oxymorons. An oxymoron is a figure of speech which employs an apparent self-contradiction to illustrate a point or to reveal a paradox. Common examples in English include deafening silence, original copy, random order, only choice, and everyone's favorite, jumbo shrimp. But today, I'd like to look to the Bible at a Hebrew oxymoron. The term is zevach shlamim, first found in the book of Leviticus, chapter 3, and subsequently in numerous other places. It's often translated as a sacrifice of well-being. Technically, however, zevach means slaughter. Sacrifice doesn't convey the violence of zevach. Shlamim comes from the root that signifies peace or whole, P-E-A-C-E, or whole, W-H-O-L-E. But a zevach is neither peaceful, nor does it leave the animal whole. The Levitical procedure requires removing the entrails, the kidneys, and the liver, and all the fat that is attached to these organs. The professor continues, so the question is, what does the term zevach shlamim signify? Is this merely a case of literary sloppiness, a writer not paying careful attention to the words he or she uses, or is something deeper intended here? Remember, zevach, to slaughter, to rip apart, shlamim, peace, whole. So the students take the challenge of the professor, and they're going to offer their own interpretations. Why would the Torah use this oxymoron, these two words that mean really the opposite of each other? So the first student raises his hand and says, this kind of sacrifice may not leave the animal whole, but it might leave the person who brought it whole. Slaughtering and dismembering an animal in front of your eyes can be a stark reminder about the finality of death and the preciousness of life. It can remind us what's really important and cautions us not to get caught up with trivial matters. Such an experience and such a realization would leave you whole, W-H-O-L-E. Second student disagrees. I would go another direction with the translation. I like a peaceful slaughter, because when people sin or do wrong, they have a deep sense of guilt. They fear that they will be punished by God. When you bring an animal sacrifice, you put your hand on the head of the animal, transferring something of yourself to that cow or sheep or goat. So when the animal is slaughtered, it becomes a scapegoat, taking the punishment that should have gone to you. Afterwards, with impending doom no longer hanging over your head, you are at peace once again. Third student has a different way to go. Let's say shlamim is related to shalom in the sense of hello. Remember, shalom, hello, goodbye, peace. A zevach shlamim would then be a greeting of slaughter. Maybe it's hard to get God to pay attention to you. Mere words of prayers might go unheard. So you have to do something that will grab God's attention. The wail of the animal, the spurting of the blood, the cutting out of the organs, and the burning of the flesh is certainly a greeting that God can't ignore. Like in The Godfather, leaving the horse's head in the Hollywood producer's bed. It's a calling card with a message. Give me what I want. or else. Teacher says, so we're going to make God an offer he can't refuse. The student responds, perhaps subconsciously, that's what we're doing. Student 4 has a different take. Maybe it's the other way around. The God, Father, makes us slaughter and butcher the animal. And then God will tell us, will warn us, follow my ways, or this is what will become of you. Teacher says, all of these are possible. So here's the lesson. Don't be so casual when you read or translate a text. Every word was chosen for a reason. You've got to figure out that reason. So 3 pieces from the Torah reading of Leviticus, which deals with sacrifice. So now we come to the Haftarah. And just a reminder, the Torah, 5 books of Moses that we read every Shabbat morning, comes from the book, 5 books of Moses that traditionalists believe God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai. But then, at a synagogue service, we then read from the Haftarah. This is from the prophets, and the books of the prophets are found in the middle section of the Bible, in the Tanakh. We call them the Nevi'im, the prophets. So first we have Joshua and Judges and Samuel and Kings. Then we have the literary prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And then we have what's known as the Trei Asar, the 12 minor prophets. Minor, not in terms of their importance or their significance, minor only in terms of the books are rather short. Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah are much longer books. Isaiah is 66 chapters, whereas you can have in the 12 prophets, the minor prophets, Obadiah is 1 chapter. In Zechariah, you might have as many as 14 chapters, but that's it. So we come this week. The Haftarah for VaYikra is from the prophet Isaiah. And it's from chapters 43 and 44. Remember, anytime you see something that's chapter 40 and on, that comes from what we refer to as Second Isaiah. Book of Isaiah has 66 chapters, and it's clear if you pay attention that there's at least 2 different collections of speeches from 2 very different time periods. First Isaiah, chapter 1 through 39, probably from around the year 750 BCE, in that area. The second Isaiah, from 40 to 66, is from sometime after the destruction of the temple in 586 BCE, continuing for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, perhaps years. And so it's clear it wasn't one person who wrote the whole book. The first section is mostly a prophet who comes to challenge, to warn the people. God is not happy, you better change your ways. The second Isaiah comes to the people in exile after the destruction. And second Isaiah often comes with a message of comfort, telling the people God still loves us, God cares about us, God will bring us back to our land, we will rebuild the temple. So that's what we find in this particular Haftarah. Isaiah, second Isaiah, is bringing a speech to people who were just about to return to Israel, or perhaps had just returned. You'll remember that it was the Babylonians who destroyed the temple and exiled the Jews. not too long later, only a matter of decades, the Persians defeated the Babylonians. And Cyrus, king of Persia, had a much more positive attitude towards the Jews and allowed them to return to Israel and rebuild their temple. But Isaiah wants to remind the people, don't make the mistake. We're on this moment of God doing this great favor for us, this wonderful kindness, bringing us back to our land, allowing us to rebuild the temple. What we can't do is smack God in the face, insult God by offering sacrifices to idols. Now, where would the people have picked that up? Remember, for decades, they've been a minority living among the Babylonians. They were simply watching what this powerful people who had subjugated them were doing. Maybe Jews thought, look how our worship of God, where it got us. Temple was destroyed. We were kicked out of our land. Babylonians are the strongest kingdom in the face of the earth. Maybe we ought to do what they're doing. Maybe we ought to imitate them. And probably a lot of Jews did. And then when the Jews came back to the land of Israel, they found that the peoples who had taken their place, they were pagans. They were worshiping idols and other gods. One other thing I want to remind you about, I've often said that when we read a Haftorah, often it is on a very high literary level. I got to confess, very often I don't understand what the words of the prophet are unless I sit and study and take out commentaries and pay careful attention to what's happening, what's going on. Imagine the irony of giving a speech, the equivalent of giving a 13-year-old a copy of Shakespeare and say, here, go learn this speech, memorize it, deliver it before 100, 200 people next Saturday. Right? That's, in a sense, what we're doing when we give a bar bat mitzvah kid something from the prophets. These are the highest literary speeches that are found in our Bible. And kids, it goes over their head. There's no way they're going to understand it. There's no way that I understand a lot of those speeches unless I stop and I go intensely into study of what's going on. So here's the theory that I've developed. In order to, and here's my point, if we don't, with our college educations, if we have difficulty, can you imagine 3,000 years ago, people who barely went to any kind of school, they could barely read and write. Were they going to understand this high-level speech that a prophet was giving? And so therefore, my theory is that the way to understand the words of the prophet is to see this as street theater, that we shouldn't pay as much attention to the words and the speech as we should to the actions that are going on, that the prophet is doing. What the prophet would do is he would gather a crowd, he would do something that would draw people's interest, their attention. They would stop whatever they were doing, and they would look at this crazy man. What's happening? And only after he finished some dramatic act, only then, when the people were puzzled, who are you? What are you doing? What are you trying to tell us? Only then would he say, aha, now let me explain what was going on, what you just saw. Okay? So to me, that's the way that we need to understand what the prophets are about and what the Haftorah means. Always look for the moment of drama, a physical drama that you could see. It was not so much what you heard, it was what your eyes showed you. And maybe that's what we need to do with bar and bat mitzvah kids. Forget about the speeches, because they'll never get them at that age. What they need to do is to try to understand, here's a guy who was a magician, who was an actor, and look what he's doing. How did he get a crowd? How did he keep their interest? And then how did he turn it around and make it into a kind of a sermon or a moral or a lesson? Okay, so Isaiah, I want to just read very quickly from the Haftorah. And again, you'll see the level of the words maybe above our heads, but you always have to search, where's the street theater here? So let me read some of the verses and then I'll interpret it the way that I understand this. So Isaiah gives the following speech. The makers of idols all work to no purpose, and the things they treasure can do no good. As they themselves can testify, they neither look nor think, and so they shall be shamed. Who would fashion a god or cast a statue that can do no good? Lo, all its adherents shall be shamed. Their craftsmen are merely human. Let them all assemble and stand up. They shall be cowed and they shall be shamed. The craftsman in iron with his tools works it over charcoal and fashions it by hammering, working with the strength of his arm. Should he go hungry, his strength would ebb. Should he drink no water, he would grow faint. The craftsman in wood measures with a line, marks out a shape with a stylus. He forms it with scraping tools, marking it out with a compass. He gives it a human form, the beauty of a man to dwell in a shrine. For his use he cuts down cedars. He chooses plane trees, P-L-A-N-E, plane trees and oaks. He sets aside trees of the forest or plants firs, and the rain makes them grow. All this serves man for fuel. He takes some to warm himself, and he builds a fire and bakes bread. And he also makes a god of it and worships it, fashions an idol and bows down to it. Part of it he burns in a fire. On that part he roasts meat. He eats the roast and is sated. He also warms himself and cries, "Ah, I am warm. I can feel the heat." Of the rest he makes a god, his own carving. He bows down to it, worships it. He prays to it and cries, "Save me, for you are my God." They have no wit or judgment. Their eyes are besmeared, and they do not see. Their minds, and they cannot think. They do not give thought. They lack the wit and judgment to say, "Part of it I burned in a fire. I also baked bread on the coals. I roasted meat and ate it. Should I make the rest an abhorrence? Should I bow to a block of wood?" So there you get an idea of some of the words. Maybe you catch what's going on. Sometimes it just goes over our head. I got news for you. In Hebrew, as somebody's chanting it, it certainly goes way over our head. So here's what I imagine was the origin of that speech. Here's what really happened. Here's the drama that went on. Early in the morning, Isaiah went out with an axe and began chopping down a tirzah tree. Dozens of people passed him by, some ignoring him, some offering greetings, some asking what he was doing. After a few hours, the tree was down, the trunk chopped into smaller sections, and the bark scraped off. Isaiah took hold of one piece of wood about the size of a baby and set it to the side. With some of the branches and logs, he made a fire. All day long, people came and went, all noticing the activity of the prophet. Sometime after noon, Isaiah put some dough by the fire, rested as he watched the bread bake. He then took a piece of meat, placed it on a stick, and roasted it. The prophet took the warm, flat piece of bread and used it to pull the charred meat from the stick. He sat back and ate his meal. As it was a cold Tevet day, he then warmed himself by the fire. Then Isaiah took out a stylus and marked the piece of wood. He removed his scraping tools and compass from his tool bag and began cutting and chiseling. A small crowd formed, watching with fascination. Isaiah ignored all their questions and comments. After a few hours, as the sun was beginning to set, it became apparent that Isaiah was making a wooden idol. The last thing that was expected of the man of God. The prophet rose and began addressing the crowd. This morning I cut down this tree. I used the wood to warm myself and to make my meal. And now with my tools I have carved an idol of the same wood that baked my bread and warmed my hands. You all watched me carve and whittle, and this is what you bow down to? This is what you pray to? This is what you turn to plead for good health, for a good harvest, for a little baby? Can the eyes of this wood see? Can the ears of this tirza tree hear? God is weary of your sins, of your idolatry. How dare you call yourselves Yisrael or Yaakov? How dare you say that you are faithful to Adonai? This is what should be done with all your idols. And Isaiah took the wooden form he had spent the day making and threw it into the fire. The crowd bowed their heads in embarrassment as they watched the flames consume the wood. So in my imagination, that's what really happened. All that we have left are the words in the Chumash, words of the Haftorah, something that was originally very dramatic and that touched the people, that made them either ashamed or made them think or made them want to repent. Today, we sort of look at our watches. How long is this going to be? Wonder what lunch is going to be today. And we try to move on. So the importance, my belief, of seeing the prophets as they originally were, street theater actors. So that's our class for today. This Saturday, 9:45, when we live stream our service, we will read from the book of Leviticus, and then we will chant this particular Haftarah. We'll take a break now for about 20 minutes. At 8:30, we'll continue with the evening's Mariv service. See you soon.